Most AI drafts are not ruined by one dramatic error. They are weakened by many small problems that demand different kinds of attention. The structure may repeat the same point in 3 sections. A factual sentence may sound plausible, but be broader than its source. The language may be grammatically clean, yet impossible to say naturally. The final motion may continue long after the narration has moved on. Trying to solve all of those problems in one editing pass creates a noisy decision process. You notice a weak word while judging the argument, then rewrite a transition before checking whether the underlying claim is true. By the end, the draft feels different, but not necessarily better. A reliable text-based workflow separates the questions. First, decide whether the argument works. Second, decide whether the important claims are supported. Third, edit the language for the channel's real voice. Fourth, map the spoken words to motion and inspect the rendered result. Each pass has a definition of done. That matters because AI makes it easy to generate another version whenever editing becomes uncomfortable. Version generation can hide the real problem. A disciplined editor stays with the approved purpose, identifies the exact failure, and changes the smallest thing that solves it. This video shows the complete workflow from raw transcript to final approved render, without turning every revision into a new creative direction. Text-based editing starts by treating the transcript as the control surface for the whole production. Lock the source script and give it an identifier before recording. If the voice is generated, save the exact text input, voice name, rate, pitch, and audio hash. If the voice is recorded by a person, create a transcript and preserve the original audio. Then divide the script into named blocks that match the viewer's experience. Hook, setup, first idea, example, review point, decision, and call to action. The names help everyone discuss the same object. Instead of saying the middle feels slow, a reviewer can say the example block repeats the core claim after the point has already landed. Maintain a change log for every approved replacement. Record the old sentence, new sentence, reason, and source if the change affects a claim. This is not bureaucracy. It prevents a later render from silently using an outdated paragraph or unauthorized voiceover. The transcript should also expose production cues. Mark the phrase that triggers a visual reveal, the word that changes a comparison, and the sentence that begins the final scene. The cue belongs to the spoken language, not to a guess time on a storyboard. When text, audio, and motion share the same named blocks, a correction can move through the pipeline without forcing a redesign. The transcript becomes a map from intention to pixels. The structural pass ignores sentence polish and asks whether the video delivers the promise it made. Write the hook's promise at the top of the page. Then label the job of every paragraph. A paragraph should establish the problem, explain a step, show an example, answer an objection, or move the viewer toward the decision. If 2 paragraphs perform the same job, keep the stronger one. If a paragraph is interesting but does not support the promise, move it into a different video. Check the sequence of information. The viewer should not need a term before it has been defined, and an example should arrive close enough to the idea it illustrates. Look for false beginnings, where the script introduces the topic, then introduces it again with different language. Look for conclusions that merely replay the entire video instead of changing the viewer's next action. For a long-form video, each chapter should create a new question that the next chapter answers. That provides forward motion without relying on exaggerated teasers. For a short, each sentence must either sharpen the tension, deliver the core idea, or make the action clear. Read only the first sentence of every paragraph. If those sentences do not form a coherent outline, the structure is not ready. Once the argument works at outline level, freeze the chapter order before entering line editing. Structural changes are expensive after audio and motion, so solve them while the project is still text. The evidence pass treats every factual claim as a separate object. Search the script for numbers, dates, policy statements, product capabilities, comparisons, and sentences that tell the viewer what will happen. Move each one into a claim ledger. Beside it, record the source, supporting passage, access date, and risk level. Then compare the grammar of the sentence with the strength of the evidence. A source that reports one example does not prove that a method always works. A current help page may support a platform rule today, but the sentence should not imply that the interface can never change. Replace absolute wording with the narrowest accurate statement. Preserve uncertainty when it is real, but do not hide a missing source behind vague phrases like probably or experts say. Either supply the evidence, state the limitation, or remove the claim. Check that examples are identified as examples rather than disguised as universal results. Check that recommendations separate personal preference from platform requirement. For AI-assisted content, review disclosure language carefully. Production assistance, such as outlining or infographic creation, is different from realistic synthetic media that may require a platform disclosure. The editor's job is not to make every sentence timid. It is to make the level of confidence visible. When the wording accurately matches the source, the script becomes both more trustworthy and more useful. The viewer learns the condition under which the advice applies instead of receiving a louder but less reliable promise. Now edit the script as spoken language. AI drafts often create symmetry that looks elegant on a page and sounds artificial out loud. 3 consecutive sentences may begin with the same phrase. Every section may end with a summary. Formal transitions may announce connections the viewer already understands. Read the script at the pace of the approved voice. Mark any sentence that requires a second breath, hides the subject, or delays the useful verb. Split long sentences where the meaning naturally turns. Replace abstract noun stacks with concrete actions. Instead of optimization of content performance, say compare the hook and change one decision. Delete the second explanation when the first one already landed. Remove generic praise such as powerful, game-changing, and revolutionary unless the script immediately explains what changed. Then add human observation. State what the team noticed, what was rejected, why a previous attempt failed, or which trade-off shaped the decision. Those details create voice because they reveal judgment. Check the emotional temperature. A policy explanation should not sound like a threat, and a workflow tutorial should not promise certainty the method cannot provide. Keep the language direct without becoming absolute. Finally, read the full script again without looking at the screen. Listen for rhythm, short sentences after dense ideas, intentional pauses before a decision, and enough variation that the voice does not become a metronome. The goal is not to make the script sound casual. The goal is to make every sentence sound chosen. Once the words are approved, generate or record the final audio and measure the real file. Do not force a predetermined duration by stretching the voice or inserting empty scenes. The audio defines when the viewer receives each idea. Use subtitle cues, waveform analysis, or measured segment durations to locate the spoken trigger for every essential visual. If the narrator says research, the research element should begin entering on that word. If the final call to action begins, the final composition should already contain meaningful information. Avoid a background-only transition that creates several seconds of visual silence. Use short deterministic entrances for instructional graphics, a modest fade, a small upward movement, or a subtle scale settle. Keep previously revealed elements visible when the explanation depends on accumulation. For comparison scenes, change the active side when the narration changes sides. For review scenes, display the claim before showing the correction. Then inspect the actual rendered MP4. Source code can prove that an element has coordinates, but it cannot prove that the viewer sees the intended result after sequence local frames, opacity, and transitions interact. Export frames around each trigger and build a contact sheet. Check the first second, every major transition, and the entire ending. Verify that motion supports speech instead of waiting for speech to finish. A well-synchronized video feels shorter because the viewer is always receiving aligned information. The final pass converts an editable project into a canonical asset. Run technical checks on the rendered file, expected resolution, frame rate, video codec, audio codec, duration, and no unexpected subtitle stream. Confirm that the narration is complete and that the approved audio was not replaced or truncated. Export representative frames directly from the MP4 and inspect text clipping, overlap, empty scenes, platform safe placement, and the final hold. Use overlay simulations for vertical platforms, but remember that simulation is preparation, not proof. A private or draft upload still needs inspection in the real interface. When the candidate passes, calculate its hash, and create the publish package from that exact file. Add the metadata, transcript, cover, quality reports, and an approval record naming the human decision. If a replacement is required, do not overwrite the approved candidate with an ambiguous file name. Create a new version, verify it, record the relationship, and only then clean the rejected media. This workflow allows speed because each failure has a defined location. Structure problems return to text. Evidence problems return to research. Voice problems return to line editing. Timing problems return to the queue map. Platform problems return to the native package. The editor no longer asks for another version of everything. The editor changes the smallest layer that is actually wrong. That is how text-based editing becomes a production system rather than a convenient way to generate more drafts.